Dakar through our website www.wadr.org. WADR, promoting dialogue.
It's 12 o'clock in Dakar and Banjul, 1 o'clock in Abuja. Good afternoon, and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and worldwide on WADR.org. This is Newslink. Here are the top stories. 25 international and local rights groups in Guinea called for the release of Biloba and Fonike Menge a year after their abduction. A special court in Bamako sentences former Minister Fili Sissoko and others to prison for embezzlement of 130 billion CFA francs. CSOs in the Gambia lament the National Assembly's rejection of the 2024 draft constitution.
It's a huge disappointment for me that our political actors and political leaders and parliamentarians are unable to sit down and discuss nation building. That is the bottom line.
And bandit attacks claim over 70 lives in Jos Plateau State, Nigeria.
One community is in Bashar district, which is in Wasi, and in that community, 10 vigilante members lost their lives while bandits came to attack the community.
Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
My name is Sankula Jibril Janko. Newslink begins in Guinea, where 25 human rights organizations, including the FNDC, are calling for an investigation into the disappearance of two Guinean activists a year ago. Mamadou Biloba and Omar Silla, known as Fonike Menge, were arrested on July 9, 2024 at the latter's home in Conakry by armed men believed to be special forces. Since then, the whereabouts of the Front for the Defense of the Constitution FNDC activists have remained a mystery. Augustine Coley reports.
In the statement issued on Tuesday, FNDC calls on the Guinean transitional government to ensure that those suspected of enforced disappearances and adoptions in Guinea are brought to justice through fair trials. The group alleges that Biloba and Fonike Menge were interrogated and tortured by state security. FNDC's account follows testimony from Muluku Suleiman, who was kidnapped along with the two activists but was released 24 hours after their adoption. While the authorities have denied these claims, their families continue to pressure the state for their unconditional release. The Attorney General on July 17, 2024, announced the launch of a thorough and comprehensive investigation into several kidnappings, including those of Umar Silla and Mamadou Biloba. But to date, no information has been provided on their progress. Yet, the surge in kidnappings and disappearances of journalists, activists and lawyers has reached an alarming level, according to rights groups in Guinea. Recently adopted and released were a civil rights activist, Abdou Sako, and the former president of the Guinean Bar Association, Mohamed Touare. The Guinean and international human rights defense organizations reiterated their call on the Guinean authorities to respect their international obligations regarding human rights by respecting, protecting, promoting, and realizing the human rights of all in the country.
Augustine Coley reporting there. In Mali, the verdict in the so-called case involving the purchase of the presidential plane and military equipment was handed down on Tuesday before the Special Inquiry Court in Bamako. The main defendant, Bori Fili Sissoko, was found guilty of damage to public property, forgery and use of forged documents. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison and ordered to pay a fine of 500,000 CFA francs. While some former government officials indicted in the matter were acquitted, others were sentenced in absentia. As Abdullah Hassan reports, the amount embezzled is estimated at over 130 billion CFA francs.
After several weeks of marathon trials full of twists and turns, the special court finally delivered its verdict in the case involving the purchase of the presidential plane and military equipment. The main defendant in this case, Buhari Phyllis Sissoko, was sentenced to 10 years in prison and ordered to pay a fine of 500,000 CFA francs by the Malian courts. The former Minister of Economy and Finance is being prosecuted for, among other things, damage to public property, forgery, and the use of forged documents and forgery. Colonel Nuhum Jabitao, the former director of the armed forces implicated in the case, was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Other defendants, Sidi Mohammed Kagnasi, Amadou Kuma, Nuhum Kuma, Sumaila Jabi, and Mustafa Ben Bakar, did not appear in court but were sentenced to life imprisonment in absentia. Former Minister of Communications Mahamadou Kamara and General Mustafa Drabo were acquitted. Contacted by WADR, Buhari Phyllis Sissoko's lawyer declined to comment on this verdict. In his closing argument earlier this week, Jangwina Tunkura stated that his client had committed no wrongdoing. He therefore requested her outright acquittal due to insufficient evidence. Incarcerated for nearly 4 years, Buhari Phyllis Sissoko has always maintained her innocence in this case. The embezzled amount amounts to more than 130 billion CFA francs.
A report by our Bamako correspondent Aliu Cham and presented by Abdullahi Hassan. In the Gambia, citizens and several civil society groups have expressed disappointment with the decision of a majority of the National Assembly to shoot down the 2024 draft document at the second reading stage on Monday. Although not directly consulted, many of these organizations made recommendations at the legislature during the constitutional amendment process. With more than 300 clauses in the draft text, the Gambia Participate says, indeed, there are minor concerns, but overall, Gambian lawmakers, due to party affiliations, missed out the bigger picture. This is to represent constituents and defend their interests. Umar Jang, Executive Director of the Gambia Participates, an advocacy group on good governance and democracy, highlights some clauses of the draft document.
It's a huge disappointment for me that our political actors and political leaders and parliamentarians are unable to sit down and discuss nation building. That is the bottom line. They are unable to sit down and discuss and agree on nation building. You have the highlights of the Constitution and the lowlight. The highlights of the Constitution is it guarantees fundamental human rights. There is right to life, right to privacy, right to profess religion, and the protection from the state being declared as a one-state religion. It establishes anti-corruption commissions, which the 1997 Constitution did not cater for. It strengthens the Independent Electoral Commission. We also had term limits. Right now in our Constitution, any president can run for infinite terms. The lowlight are the expansion of the powers of the president. To an extent, he can nominate and recall a parliamentarian. Another lowlight is the president appointing the Inspector General of Police to be part of the Judicial Service Commission. That is not compatible with the ideology of separation of power. So all the others are clauses that could be discussed, negotiated, strike compromise that is not going to, as one of the lawyers said, dilute the content of the Constitution. So it's a balance. And that is the reason why many countries have what we call law reform commissions. The laws that were there that make sense 300 years ago or 100 years ago will not make sense this period.
Marnyang is the Executive Director of Gambia Participate.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Now, in Togo, the issue of postponing the election is a matter of debate within the political class. Amid the electoral process, some opposition parties are calling for the postponement of the municipal elections scheduled for July 17, a request rejected by the Permanent Consultative Framework CPC. Christopher Aticho has the rest of the details.
As the municipal election campaign goes into full swing, the dynamics for the People's Majority, DMP, ADI, and the Democratic Forces for the Republic Party are demanding a postponement of the votes. These opposition political parties cite the recent protest of June 26, 27, and 28. However, the Permanent Consultation Framework firmly rejects this request for a postponement. The campaign, which began on July 1, is taking place in all 117 municipalities across the country. The vote will elect 1,527 municipal councillors at a time when the opposition is seeking to reposition itself on the local political scene.
A report by Sylvie Wadr in Lome and voiced by Christopher Aticho. Now, let's head to Nigeria because armed men, locally referred to as bandits, have attacked two communities in Plateau State, located in North Central region, killing several people. Sources on the ground told WADR that between 60 and 80 people lost their lives in these attacks and nearly 100 sustained injuries. Among them, vigilante members contracted to protect communities from armed attacks that have surged in the region since the beginning of the year. Aliu Bafa, chairman of the vigilance group in the affected area, said the bandits ambushed the vigilantes as they were heading to their hideout in the government reserve forest, popularly known as Madam Forest. Sapi Sambo, a youth leader in the affected area, said efforts are continuing to determine the exact number of those killed in the incident. Ruan Tuang Wong, a journalist based in Jos Plateau State, joins us for additional information.
One community is in Bashar district, which is in Wasi, and in that community, 10 vigilante members lost their lives while bandits came to attack the community. And based on reports that we have from Wasi, houses were burned, properties were burned in the process of that attack. While in a separate attack, or let me call it an ambush, that one happened in Kukawa, same day. Now there is a forest that borders Bauchi and Taraba states, and that forest, it is alleged that most of the bandits have taken over that forest. So based on the report we got, vigilante members from Kanam mobilized themselves to dislodge criminal hideout in that forest. But the bandits laid an ambush to them, which resulted to the death of several of the vigilante members.
What sort of measures are being put in place by state authorities to ensure the security of those residents in towns that have been attacked?
Generally, we've heard of the operations of the Special Task Force that has been in place for over a decade now in Plateau State. Now, we've seen also the introduction of the agro rangers, particularly today. We witnessed the passing out of about 150 agro rangers, and those ones are supposed to secure farmland. But if you look at the effort, to be candid, citizens are expecting a lot. Most of the measures are reactive measures. After the attack has been carried out, that's when the securities come in, and in some cases, after they come in, they still withdraw. So, to a large extent, I would say the measures handled by government, much is expected by citizens.
Wang Tangwong is a journalist based in Jos Plateau State, Nigeria. Now, away from security to trade and diplomacy, a $1.8 billion consensus and assets agreement has been signed between the Liberian government and Ivanhoe Atlantic. The agreement with the American company will enable multi-use railroad infrastructure to transport mineral resources such as iron ore from Guinea to the country. Discussions between the two parties lasted between 14 and 16 months. WDR's Abraham Parker has the rest of the details.
According to Liberia's Information Minister, Jerolime Pia, the agreement signed with Ivanhoe Atlantic is designed to boost economic opportunities in the country. The deal, which aligns with the government's multi-use rail policy, also considers a mineral development agreement for the Yekepa to Picano Railroad.
What was signed is considered a concession and access agreement for a real access agreement that will enable the transportation and shipment of iron ore from Guinea through Yekepa Picano.
The signed instrument would now undergo a ratification process as defined by the Liberian Constitution. The National Investment Commission, to do the executive, will submit the instrument to the president, who will then forward it to the legislature for ratification. Once ratified, the $1.8 billion investment is expected to bring substantial economic benefits to Liberia, says Jeremy Pia.
The concession and asset agreement also considers Ashwabita's rights and privileges, which also provides for a multi-user framework, is consistent with the PPCC Act.
Initially announced as a $5 billion deal, observers have expressed concerns that the government may have felt pressured into signing the subsequent agreement with an estimated value of $1.8 billion. The signed agreement was released by the U.S. Embassy near Monrovia just before President Joseph Boakai departed for Washington to attend the U.S. 5 African Nations Summit. For Newslink on WADR, Abraham Parker, Monrovia.
You're listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM Dakar. Here is a reminder of our top stories. 25 international and local rights groups in Guinea called for the release of Biloba and Fonike Menge a year after their abduction. A special court in Bamako sentences former finance minister Félix Sissoko and others to prison for embezzlement of 130 billion CFA francs. CSOs in the Gambia lament the National Assembly's rejection of the 2024 draft constitution, and bandit attacks claim over 70 lives in Jos Plateau State, Nigeria. Still ahead in the news, we have the press review, guest interview, and sports. Please stay with us.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
Elsewhere, Ghana's performance under the IMF-supported $3 billion US program took a sharp downturn at the end of 2024, despite higher than expected economic growth and improved external conditions. The International Monetary Fund has raised red flags over significant fiscal slippages and reform delays in the run-up to the 2024 elections, even as it approved a $367 million US disbursement under its extended credit facility. Accra correspondent Nadi Tete tells us more.
The IMF Executive Board has completed the fourth review of Ghana's $3 billion extended credit facility, unlocking a new disbursement of $367 million, bringing the total disbursement since May 2023 to nearly $2.3 billion. However, the approval came with strong warnings about Ghana's deteriorating program performance, largely due to pre-election fiscal slippages, delayed reforms, and inflation overshooting targets. The fund cited a large buildup of arrears and missed fiscal targets at the end of 2024 as threats to Ghana's economic recovery, even though recent data shows inflation is beginning to ease. Economist and finance professor at the University of Ghana, Professor Godfred Bokbin, says the IMF's verdict is unsurprising.
Under the supervision of the IMF, we couldn't keep to fiscal discipline. Without IMF supervision in election years, we were not able to keep to fiscal discipline. The bulk of what we have seen in 2024 should not surprise any Ghanaian because we saw this in 2016 again under the 16th IMF supported program.
The IMF notes that Ghana's new leadership has moved quickly to correct course, passing a tighter 2025 budget, launching public financial reforms, and adjusting electricity prices. The target is a 1.5% primary surplus in 2025, supported by enhanced revenue collection and spending discipline. But the fund warns that sustaining progress will depend on stronger tax administration, stricter budget controls, and urgent reforms in the energy and cocoa sectors, which continue to pose fiscal risks. For WDR, Nadi Tete, Accra.
This is the newspaper review. Stay abreast and find out what the top stories are in your country.
This is the newspaper review.
The newspaper review.
For today's newspaper review, let's join WDR's Accra correspondent Nadi Tete for major headlines on Ghanaian dailies.
Greetings. Welcome to the Newspaper Review segment. We start off with the Daily Graphic newspaper front page. Report illegal gold dealers for reward. President Mahama at inauguration of Gold Board Task Force. Government releases 4 billion Ghana cedis to pay road contractors. And Trade Ministry holds national dialogue on first agribusiness policy. And President commiserates with U.S. government on Texas flooding. That's it for the Daily Graphic newspaper. The Ghanaian Times front page, road construction bounces back, 4 billion Ghana cedis ready for contractors. That's according to the sector minister. And suspended CJ goes to ECOWAS court. That's it for the Ghanaian Times newspaper. The New Crusading Guide newspaper front page, no political intrusion inside account. How ENP acquired comatose Black Volta gold project in $100 million deal with Azuma Resources Ghana. Other stories here says some Jonah Defense Engineers and Planners ENP acquisition of Black Volta gold project. Other stories here, we want to be coerced to go for Ablekuma North rerun. That's according to the NPP. The Daily Guide newspaper front page, gold smuggling crackdown. 10% seize gold or cash for informants according to President Mahama. NPP goes to court over Ablekuma North rerun, and Baomia and Parliament mourn late Akwetia MP. The Chronicle newspaper front page, Mahama declares zero tolerance for gold smuggling. Komfanoche is not from Ewukugwa, researcher says. To the Herald newspaper front page, Ghana's engineers and planners exposes greedy Australians. Other stories, rewrites Ghana's anti-corruption playbook. Julius Debra tells task force. Suspended CJ Tokonu runs to ECOWAS Court of Justice, cites unlawful suspension, and ENI declares a ban Akoma oil and gas fields commercially viable. The Informer newspaper front page, Tarzan on elections 2024. Bad policies cost MPP, not Baumia. That's it for the newspaper review segment. Is back to you in the studio.
Thank you very much, our Accra correspondent Nadi Tete with the newspaper review.
Politics, analysis on major news, social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
This afternoon, in our guest interview, we turn our attention back to the Gambia, where frustration is mounting among citizens and civil society groups following the National Assembly's decision to reject the 2024 draft constitution at its second reading on Monday. While many of these organizations were not directly consulted, they had submitted recommendations to lawmakers during the constitutional amendment process. Despite the draft containing over 300 clauses, advocacy group Gambia Participate argues that although there were minor concerns, the bigger picture was lost largely due to party-driven decisions rather than focus on representing the interests of the Gambian people. Well, joining us now is Mar Nyang, Executive Director of Gambia Participates, a civil society organization promoting good governance and democratic accountability. He shed light on key aspects of the draft document and what this setback means for constitutional reform in the Gambia.
Well, it's a huge disappointment for me that our political actors and political leaders and parliamentarians are unable to sit down and discuss nation building. That is the bottom line. What they've done is it's either my way or not your way, to the detriment of the citizens. An opportunity was given to them to do so in 2020. They rejected it. On what basis? On party lines, not citizen interest. 2024, the opportunity was presented again to parliamentarians, citizens still waiting for them to sit, discuss, and agree on nation building. They failed to do that. Now, it's a disappointment.
There is the conversation about lack of extensive consultation in this whole process. Were your outfits included or consulted during the consultation process? If you can share with us.
No. The consultation, we all agreed the process that the government took in reintroducing this 2024 draft was not consultative. Now, what do you do as political leaders in civil society? Should you sit on your anger or rise above your anger and frustrations and look at the bigger picture, which is the common goal of the country, which is to gain constitutional reform?
Could you highlight some of the remarkable amendments made in the drafts that ought to be considered for consideration so that it bypasses the second reading stage?
There are over 200 clauses, or about 300 clauses in the draft constitution. You have the highlights of the Constitution and the lowlights. The highlights of the Constitution is it guarantees fundamental human rights. There is right to life, right to privacy, right to profess religion, and the protection from the state being declared as a one-state religion, right to practice political ideologies, and then also multi-party democracy. It establishes anti-corruption commissions, which the 1997 Constitution did not cater for. It established human rights bodies. It strengthened the Independent Electoral Commission. It strengthened the judiciary. I can go on and on and on and give you all the expected fundamental human rights that are consolidated in this Constitution and some democratic principles that are codified in this Constitution as well. The lowlights are the expansion of the powers of the president. To an extent, he can nominate and recall a parliamentarian. That is a lowlight. Another lowlight is the president appointing the Inspector General of Police to be part of the Judicial Service Commission. It's not compatible with the ideology of separation of powers, because the Inspector General of Police brings cases in his name and he also answers to cases in his name. So you cannot be the referee in the prayer. That was undemocratic.
You've actually hinted of the highlights and some of the lowlights. And so going forward, what will be the next move of the CSOs going forward regarding where we are at the moment on this particular draft constitution?
We will continue to do our advocacy for piecemeal legislative and constitutional reform until we're able to strengthen our public law system.
Marnyang is the executive director of Gambia Participates. Well, in sports, let's begin with the CAF Women Africa Cup of Nations, because Senegal's Lionesses will take on the Copper Queens of Zambia at the CAF Women's Africa Cup of Nations WAFCON this evening in the second Group A match at El Bashir Stadium in Mohammedia at 4 p.m. Senegal made a strong start to their campaign with a dominant 4-0 victory over DR Congo, while Zambia heads into their crucial encounter on the back of a thrilling 2-2 draw against tournament host Morocco in their opening fixture. Tonight's clash also revives memories of their tightly contested 2022 WAFCON quarterfinal, where the two sides were evenly matched in a 1-1 draw after extra time. Elsewhere, new signing João Pedro delivered a brace to propel Chelsea into the FIFA Club World Cup semi-final, sealing a 2-0 victory over his former club Fluminense. The 23-year-old Brazilian forward, who joined Chelsea from Brighton and Hove Albion just 6 days ago, struck twice in the first half with clinical finishes. His goals proved decisive as Chelsea booked their place in the final and edged closer to international silverware. Meanwhile, Luis Enrique remained composed ahead of PSG's World Cup semi-final clash with Real Madrid, downplaying any focus on Kylian Mbappe's much anticipated reunion with his former club. Real Madrid will take on PSG for a place in the final of the FIFA Club World Cup. And finally, reigning 2024-25 Super League champions Galatasaray are reportedly on the verge of securing a sensational move for Super Eagles striker Victor Osimhen, according to Soccer.net. The Turkish Giants are said to be in the final stage of negotiations with Napoli for a permanent transfer that would see Osimhen make his way to the Rams Park. And we have come to the end of this edition of Newslink from West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Do interact with us via our social media platforms, X and Instagram, an English service, and on Facebook, WADR English service, and stream live at wadr.org. Special thanks to Mustafa Sek and Umu Danyogo for the technical assistance. Well, coming up at the bottom of the hour is WADR's flagship program, that is Gender Program 50/50 with Na Diditete. I am Sankule Janko. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via Hot 104.3 FM, Newmi FM 94.0,
Hilltop Radio 104.7 FM,
and Veritas Radio 102.9 in Banjul, the Gambia. We also appreciate our listeners in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM, Lofa County,
Radio Kagama 94.5 FM, Niba County, DCN Radio 91.3 FM, FM, Riverside County. Wakat FM Radio, Banga, Liberia. Radio Baf FM, 91.3 Sierra Leone.
For you listening via Radio Pad 95.1 Damango, Savannah region, and on Royals FM 104.7 Wenchi, Ghana, we say a big thank you. Remember, West Africa Democracy Radio is all about you, your